as we finally began to approach the Northern District. This part of the Yellow District was much different than our own, which became clear and evident as we approached. As we reached the outer edge of the city, having to slow down, the hustle and bustle of people was very apparent. At this point, it was actually starting to get fairly late. The sun had already gone down, and yet, this city was still wide awake. There were lights on everywhere. All of the streets were well lit, and despite the late time that it was, somewhere around 8 o'clock, the city was still in full swing. All the lighted roads were perfect for constant travel. People were still moving about in all directions. There were traffic signs, stoplights, even people overseeing traffic, and countless cars moving throughout the streets. Most of them were in fair condition, especially considering that they were pre-war. But being that we are now in the North District, that was to be expected. The north section of the Yellow District is basically where heavy business takes place. This place is about one thing and one thing only: profit. This was where all of the major commerce that fed into every other part of the Yellow District passed through. All of the food grown in the South District was transported here, sold off, and then distributed to the other districts. The same with alcohol, medication, and other things produced in the West District. All of the steel manufacturing and old world dug-up weapons that came from the East District ended up here eventually. Basically, it was the commerce center for the entire Yellow District. All major business was conducted here. A city where everything was shipped in, sold to countless businesses, and shipped right back out. It was constantly working, 24 hours a day, and thus all of the vehicles that the people needed to do their jobs, transport merchandise, all had to be kept in good condition. A breakdown might affect their profit margins, the effectiveness or speed at which they transport their goods. That wasn't something that they were going to take a chance on. Here, people worked 24/7. It was a never-ending circle of jobs. When one group of people went to sleep, the other group of people woke up. A city that was always running full tilt, that kept the whole of the Yellow District alive. And this was where we were going to find our programmer. But unlike the people of this city, I did need to sleep. Me and Emily had been driving all day to get here, and even though we packed water and food, the quality is a far throw from being something that you really want to sustain on, and the heat is exhausting, even with the gear that we have to try to keep cool. After an entire day of driving, which would have been a much longer trip if I wasn't able to move so quick on our bike. Even so, I needed to get some sleep. So, me and Emily found another hotel, renting the cheapest rooms that we could get so that we could get a night's rest and start early in the morning. After that day of driving, I entered the room completely wiped out, sprawled out over my cheap mattress, and went to sleep. I was woken up to the sunlight beginning to beam through the window. The hotel that we had decided to stay in was fairly large and had 2 floors to it. We had gotten 2 rooms on the second floor. The rooms were fairly small and cramped, but serviceable if you needed a place to rest, and cheaper than a lot of the other places. We weren't trying to live on the high end of things. We still had a very strict budget, and our trip to the West District definitely cost us more than we wanted it to. Things there are way too expensive. They were cheaper here. about half the price, but still not as cheap as I'm used to back in the East District. But regardless, I shook myself awake, stretching out before I started up the day. First things first, I needed to find out if Al had gotten the necessary information. So I headed down to the front desk, where of course there was someone standing there to serve the clients. Hey, you guys wouldn't have a long-range communications device, would you? Yes, of course. Just one moment, the man behind the counter said, reaching underneath it and pulling out a large box-like device, which I easily recognized as a long-range communications device. The cables attached to it running beneath the counter, most likely connected to a receiver on the roof. Sir, there is a charge for using this. Yeah, no problem, I said, taking out my wallet. It turned out that the cost of using a long-range communication device was still fairly cheap. It tended to be acceptable, and this case was no different. Unlike back in the West District, people here weren't trying to rip you off at every corner. The prices were fair. So, after picking the device up, dialing in on Al's location, and his specific receiver settings for his long-range communication device, I pressed the contact button and sat for a moment waiting for him to pick up. After about a minute or so, he finally answered. You've reached Al's Auto. What the hell do you want? Hey Al, I replied. Morning, old man. I'm finally down here in the North District. I need to know if you got the information you needed to zero in on our programmer. Oh yeah. Well, it took me quite a bit of calling around and levying a few favors, but I did get the information. Apparently, this guy has a go-between. You're supposed to go to a bar. Ask for a guy named Lester. He's the go-between. Lester will get in contact with the guy, and afterwards he'll come back and give you the information on where exactly to find him. That's if he decides to meet you. Apparently he turns down most. So if push comes to shove, you might need to find a way to pull the information out of him, if he doesn't want to see you. It's either that, or find a new way to get a programmer. The bar is called 2-Bit Respite. It's open 24/7, so there shouldn't be a problem getting in. I don't think they're known for high-class clientele. So, how'd you guys fare on getting a weapons tech? Did everything go smooth? Or are you on the hunt for one still? Yeah, Al. Everything went smooth, I suppose. We managed to get the weapons tech we needed. He should be on his way down to my place shortly to start setting up. Well, who did the guy turn out to be? Well, that's the kicker, Al. It turns out it was freaking Danny Dynamite. Bullshit. No freaking way Emily knew that guy. Or that he owed her a favor. No, old man, that's the thing. You're not gonna freaking believe this, but Emily is Danny Dynamite's freaking sister. Apparently, they had a falling out a long ways back. And for whatever reason, Danny feels like he owes his sister. So, when Emily came asking him to be my weapons tech, he agreed to it without question. Hell, if I hadn't had a vehicle, he would have just gotten one for me. I don't know how he screwed things up with them, but he definitely feels bad about it. And she's cashing those chips in Thankfully, for my benefit,